All right. It looks like we are live. Hello and welcome to the second edition of Collective Brains Fireside Chat. My name is Marty Nealand, and I'll be your host for today's deep dive. Collective Brains is the leading online platform for executive mentoring, where you can hire mentors, where you can get trained and certified, and you can join our network. It's also a place where companies can enhance their internal mentoring programs through our new and customized program development. You can also learn more about our AI coaching and mentoring platform named Hey Vicky. In this second fireside chat, we're excited to share insights with our distinguished guests on the topic of remote leadership, building emotional intelligence, and engagement in a virtual world. I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll go alphabetically. Just put a note in there that we do have another panelist joining us here in a few moments. Traffic is getting in the way, so he'll be joining us as well very soon. Melissa, please share an introduction about yourself, your name, background, and what pivotal moment got you into coaching and mentoring, please. Go for it.
Sure. Hi, I am Melissa Bloom. My background started in executive education and had the opportunity to the point of this webinar to lead an mostly remote education team for an international company, which was really interesting and very much contributed to what I do now. Because when you're in the education space, that's a deeply personal space. And so when you're working with a remote team, that's really interesting. So I did that for quite some time, had great success as president of that company, and then started my own coaching and consulting company, really for companies that want to lean into that power of mentoring and coaching at scale, which is sort of the pivotal moment for me as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Sheehan, please jump in there. A little bit about yourself, your name, background, and what pivotal moment got you into this space.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheehan Chuan, dialing in from Seattle, Washington today. I started my career in nonprofit, but my first experience in terms of managing and working virtually, I'd say started in China. I was managing a virtual regional team covering the entire country, and then later on it covered Southeast Asia, covering 4 countries. And so just having to scale and understand different cultures and working backgrounds all remotely was a great learning opportunity. And in terms of how I entered the space in mentoring and coaching, as a very successful sales and marketing executive, I really enjoyed the branding and helping companies enter new markets. But I found that the key to success was not just in creating and delivering the best product, but it was in allowing my clients to make quicker and better decisions. Because oftentimes you're going to see like a stuck point where there's a group of people who just cannot kind of get past a barrier or a limiting factor. So my curiosity then grew in terms of team development, team dynamics. How do you understand the core motivators of individuals? How can you improve employee engagement within organizations? And how can we understand our clients at a deeper level behaviorally so that we can best serve them? And so I've been an executive coach, facilitator, including a Collective Brains mentor for the last over a decade. And I love being in the space. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Beautiful. Well, let's dive in. I want to start jumping in there about, let's recalibrate remote leadership, building emotional intelligence and engagement in the virtual world. We're in a virtual world right now. You're in Seattle, Sheehan. Melissa, where are you?
I'm in Illinois.
Illinois, and I'm in Austin. And Yvonne Oliveira is in Brazil right now, keeping all the lights on of this program. So thank you very much. I'll call out for that, Yvonne. So let's jump in. Remote leadership, building emotional intelligence and engagement in a virtual world. You guys both kind of touched on that in your introductions. Here's the first topic: adapting leadership styles for a virtual environment. How has the shift to remote work changed what we expect from leaders in terms of emotional intelligence? EI, can you share specific strategies or personal experiences where adapting leadership style was crucial for the success of your remote teams? So, Melissa, why don't you just jump right in there?
Sure. So part of what I really prescribe to is understanding leadership styles in general. There's so many flavors and ways to do that. And of course, I have my own preferred method,
Mhm.
but I think that what we've done as a kind of a nice to have thing in the past decade is really almost a necessity. You really do have to have a level of self-awareness about how you tend to lead naturally, how you tend to work under pressure. Because if you don't know that about yourself, it's going to be very difficult for you to adapt as a leader, which is crucial to the way that your team needs you to show up. Um, Self-awareness, is really key. I think if we're not self-aware, then it's very difficult to lead a team remotely.
Right. Yes, it is. And you hit on some really important topics, self-awareness, and part of the leadership style, which is really critical in a virtual environment, that self-awareness, and then how do you help other people walk through that process of their self-awareness so that they can succeed and thrive in their space. Real quick, we'll pop back over here. Philip Vandervoort has joined the call. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Understand there was a little bit of traffic getting in the way to jumping in here on the call. Really
Yeah,
quickly, Philip, would you mind doing a quick introduction, a little bit about yourself, your name, background, and what pivotal moment got you into this space, and then we'll jump back into the questions.
yeah, indeed. Well, quite quite a thing to be stuck in a 2-hour traffic jam when um, working from home is is the topic
Is a
we're all
thing.
discussing. I mean, you would expect it to head the other direction. Yeah. So hi Marty. Hi everybody. Yeah. So my background is I'm an engineer and have been between the business and IT for all my career. Basically, I started off with a very classical company in IT with DuPont. Worked for them in the US, in Switzerland, in Germany, and in France. Then I moved to real IT, where I became the CIO of a company. I moved from CIO to a general management function in engineering. Then I went back and became the worldwide CIO of AB InBev, Anheuser-Busch InBev. And I moved again from IT into the business, where I was their business VP for Central and Eastern Europe. And then I went back to IT and I joined Microsoft, became the COO of Microsoft in Latin America and the Caribbean. Then I moved into telco, ran the incumbent in Belgium, and then I went back to the Caribbean, and the circle is then round because there I ran a telco company in the Caribbean and East Pacific and Middle America. I've met a lot of people working remotely or let's not call it remotely, but not in-person contact or face-to-face has been a large part of my career. I have been doing that all my career, basically, in all those different locations. And it's a topic that really is very dear to my heart because it well, it makes or it breaks a company. And I think there's so many things moving and changing at this point in time um, that we have to take a holistic position on this and really look at what are the preferences, what is it that a company looks for, how can we coach our collaborators and our managers in many cases, or even our customers in working with that. But I guess that you've been deep into the topic already over the last 15 minutes, so I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Welcome to the call. And it's pretty fun about talking about remote working environments and you being stuck in traffic. But nonetheless, welcome to the call. Here we are. Xian, did you want to jump in there on the adapting leadership styles for the virtual environment and kind of tail off of anything that Melissa was saying or bring anything else up?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. I mean, it's a big topic and it differs person to person. But I'd say it starts, like as Melissa said, with self-awareness and understanding what your individual goals are as a leader and understanding areas of growth and opportunity, knowing your team, being self-aware and having that EQ to understand different styles, team members, their location, and how to ensure that you can keep everyone engaged and connected. I'd say because if you are managing a remote team, being able to pick up on cues and building rapport and trust becomes ever more important because say if your team is not working full-time in the office yet, you might be missing out on a lot of those nuances and connective moments that you naturally would have in the kitchen or in passing or just kind of popping by. And so I think managing interactions virtually just requires a lot more intentional effort to know what your position is, what you hope to build, how do you want to build that connection, how to remain equitable, and with people in different time zones and different places, personalities, and understanding too, what would be a good cadence to ensure that the team can connect, as oftentimes too we're becoming inundated with so much tech and online time. Some people love it for the flexibility and other people just crave off-screen time. And so just a lot of different topics come up and different preferences, and being able to be aware of those and to create the best kind of arrangement with your team while keeping in mind your own leadership goals, I think is essential in maintaining and growing a team or company virtually.
Right, right. Philip, the question was adapting leadership styles for a virtual environment. How has the shift to remote work, more or less a shift in your role because you've already been doing it, but how has that shift to remote work changed what we expect from leaders, as the panelists here are all leaders, in terms of emotional intelligence? Can you share specific strategies or personal experiences where adapting leadership style was crucial for remote team success?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that is crucial as a leader is that you have to be much more open to cues of your collaborators. Let's I I I I I didn't invent this myself. I just stole it from someone. But if you have a person-to-person conversation, you have X dimensions. I mean, you have the language, you have the body language, you have the intonation, you have the eye movement, you have the behavior of the full body, positioning of the individual. So I don't know how many dimensions that is, but it's a lot. And if you bring that down to just a phone call, if you strip the video and just do the phone call, then basically you're down to one, maybe two dimensions. And fine, if you're in a video conference, then you might have one or two more dimensions. But the critical thing is to really have, as a leader, all your radars tuned into all the possible variable cues that somebody might be giving you, so that you can so that you can bring out the most out of everybody. I think that's the way to say it. Some you have to tune down, others you have to invite up. Others prefer discussing in this type of environment, yet another group will not prefer to do that. And I think as a leader, getting the best out of every individual out of the pack in that type of environment is, I think, immensely more difficult than when you have everybody face to face around a conference table.
Right. You're not picking up on those nonverbal communication skills as much as you would when you're in person. And Shiana and Melissa, you guys both touched on that. As far as for your self-awareness, you're really looking at the overall picture. Phone calls, it's pretty much one-dimensional. these chats, you get to see a little bit of hand movement. You get to see the eyes a little bit more than you normally would, and rather than in person where you see the entire deal. So that really is on the leadership to grow themselves in the corporate environment to be able to adapt to that virtual environment. I'd like to jump into what do you think about the?
And I think
Go
the
ahead.
most important thing is, well, the leader has to, well, not interfere, but really invite from every individual in the team, really get the best out of, well, the maximum out of their potential, out of the potential that is there, in a given circumstance. So that has to be the goal. Make everybody perform up to its top potential. I think that is crucial.
Yep, agreed. Melissa, Sheehan, anything else on that?
I mean, I'm sort of thinking, your original question about leadership styles and how that contributes. So some of us naturally lead sort of in a visionary state, right? Like we like to talk to think, myself included. Some of us are very task oriented and vice. There's all sorts, there's different leadership styles. But I think one of the things is when you're leading a remote team, you have to be very comfortable understanding that your preferred leadership style may not be the best way that everybody else is going to communicate. And you have to be very intentional about having very regular communication. You really have to be tight on how you meet with people, when you meet with people, because to Philip's point, you miss out on the opportunity for somebody to swing by your office and say, oh, hey, like, I didn't quite get what you were saying in that meeting because I was in my like flow state, right? You can't do that in a virtual environment and not lose a lot of time and efficiency. So I think this actually not, in addition to being self-aware, also being very focused on systemic communication and how you operate, and that is really, really important.
Awesome. Sheehan.
Yeah, I think to that, Melissa, I mean, there is no coffee maker anymore, huh? So the talk around the coffee maker disappears.
Yes.
Yeah, Marty, I was going to add that keeping our conversations holistic and human focused so that we still stay connected as a humanity is very important when we work from home or we rely so much on digital communication. And oftentimes our conversations can feel very transactional. We have Zoom links and invitation links just across our screen down the calendar, and it just feels like something you're just getting through. And sometimes it's like if you were having a water cooler conversation, you can have it a minute or two longer, versus nowadays, people are down to the minute. They're like, okay, I'm 3 minutes over my next call, I'm late, I gotta go. And it could feel almost like a pressure cooker. And so I think to be able to build and create room in your schedule to be able to keep these connections, to build rapport with others, to know that we need space in between calls so that we're able to feel like the connections we have still have that human component, and it's not just a very transactional effort of trying to get through a productive day. And however we do that is different for everyone. But I would say being very intentional, like I have clients whose companies are getting acquired. And so having to know a whole new team of people in a very large company where it's, partially remote, but also removed. How do you establish rapport with executives that you don't know? Or even clients who are now in the C-suite after promotion, just thinking how do they best represent themselves? And if they're doing remote calls and meetings, how do you, take in those cues, but also know your own barriers? So if someone is less likely to speak up and step in, wanting to be invited, knowing that you might have that barrier, but there's ways to work through it. So I think some issues that might come up because of virtual also might exist in real life, but it's just, if you are virtual, you have to be so intentional in crafting time and effort and doing things that might naturally already exist if you're all face to face.
For sure. For sure. Something, a question that's popping up in my mind is empathy as a leadership tool. Empathy is often discussed in leadership roles and in their models, but how does it look in practice for remote teams? Can you give us an example of when empathy played a critical role in resolving an issue or enhancing team performance? Now, this is a challenging question, providing that to your team, because we're all talking about how do we help our teams perform better, and what are the strategies that we can do that with. And what we're talking about is self-awareness, the different layers of kept catching those cues. How do you then relate that to empathy? And then can you guys provide examples of how you've done that successfully with your teams? And anybody can jump right in.
It's
Philip,
difficult.
you're smiling. It is difficult, but it's so important, right?
Yeah, it is crucial, and there's also the question of guilt coming in that I don't think you've mentioned yet. But I mean, how do people feel themselves by not being in the office where when some of them are in the office, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a super complex it's a super complex set of data.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, empathy is to kind of just double click on it. Leaders need to have it, right? Leaders have the experience of climbing the ranks. Leaders have seen more than the entry and middle layer players or employees, and being able to almost read minds, if you will, because as you said, you have reduced cues uh, of communication. So it's almost there's more pressure on leaders to adapt to that virtual world and increase their skill sets to be able to say, gosh, did this head leaning this way? Did it mean this or that? Are they when people are multitasking? Are they losing attention? How do we set up those strategies to where we can foster that, and then you as leaders be able to open that up? I mean, any ideas that you guys have had in this space?
Well, I think part of having empathy as a leader, first and foremost, empathy is so tied to trust
Mm,
that if you're not an intentional leader in the first place, it's going to be very difficult for you to have real empathy where people are going to feel that what you're offering them is truly empathetic. So I think there's some front work to be done there. And to your point of being able to recognize people's cues and lean into questions that might, in a private setting, might be able to help pull out something that they need to share or that is impacting the team, or that you yourself as a leader need to be open to changing. Empathy is really difficult if you don't have trust first. It can come across as condescending.
Empathy is also really important in the recipient to feel like they can be vulnerable. And in a culture where vulnerability is accepted, where you can say, hey, I messed up here, or I had a success and I can be acknowledged, or to share an area that you're working on, builds trust. And so with trust being the foundational element and key to any successful team and team performance, empathy is one of the key virtues and capabilities that leaders need to ensure that they can read the room, understand their team, and to Melissa's point, whether it's offline, having more private conversations to understand the background around what might not be shared or spoken in a group environment because somebody might be going through something personal and it doesn't feel as appropriate to share with the group, or with those individual team relationships already built, how do you build a culture of trust and empathy and compassion where people can feel like they can bring their best selves, but also be accepted and okay and supported when they're not feeling their best. And I think all of that is key in a time where we can feel overtly focused on performance and getting something done. We're just so isolated in what each of us individually are going through personally, professionally, or as an organization and as a society. So I'd say building the strong and trust-based culture through empathy is key before everything else.
Completely agree. And that leads me into my next question, the impact of isolation on emotional intelligence. Remote work often leads to isolation, right? How can leaders use their emotional intelligence to mitigate feelings of loneliness and disconnect among their team members? Are there tools or practices that you found to be able to bring them into the fold? Jump right in.
I think adding this, bring them into the fold, to link that to the previous question about empathy. You can, I think in the past, empathy was looked at or was seen as from the leader towards the employee. I think modern leaders might look at it already a little bit more comprehensive as also from the employee to the leader, because I think that's equally important. It has to reciprocal, otherwise it doesn't work. But I think with people not being in one-to-one meetings, it is also empathy in between the different participants of the meeting, because if that doesn't exist, then whatever tool you have will not bring them all into the fold. So it really needs to be a super well-oiled machine and group of people that work together really, really, really well. And then it can be facilitated by tools, I think. But unless you have that multi dimensional connection between each and everyone in the team, I think no tool will help.
So when I think about isolation, to Philip's point about tools, and I think this actually is pertinent whether you're remote or not, because things have changed so drastically even since the pandemic with AI and the capability for us to really immerse ourselves in tech as opposed to talking to people. I think isolation can exist just as much and be hidden a little bit more maybe in a office that's all together as much as it is when we're remote. So to that point, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, when do we need to have human communication and dialogue in our day-to-day operations, whether we're remote or not? Like, when do we need to have feedback? When do we need to have dialogue and decision making and discussion and contribution? None of that can be fully taken over by technology tools. It can certainly be supplemented. It can help us bring better ideas to the table, but there are human interactions that have to take place. And I think it's very easy, honestly, right now for us to pull entirely away from some of those conversations because we feel like we can get these answers somewhere else without talking to people.
Xian, anything there?
I think technology can create isolation because we can be so used to and comfortable in operating the way that we're most comfortable from where we work, the time in which you want to work, and be used to just having these communication through a tool. But I think technology should serve to boost our connection to other people. It serves as more as a channel, but it shouldn't take over the human aspect of needing connection with other people. So I'd say that the antidote to isolation is community and connection. And that first starts within ourselves to be clear around, what kind of community or connection are we craving? And how do we want to create that outside of us, whether it's with our teams or organizations? And I think the more individuals kind of can start to take ownership of that, at least it gives them some sort of agency to say, what kind of connection or experiences do we want? And then from a leader standpoint, I would ask, what kind of culture or team community do you want to create? There's a lot of like customs, ways of working, ways of celebrating, creating opportunities and space to share best practices, vulnerable moments. And so it's helping individual team members to feel like they're included and part of a bigger picture, that they belong in the team, that they share the same ideology or vision and mission. And so I think there's a lot of ways to break down the barriers to isolation, but it goes to saying that we need even more conversation and connection around what keeps us together, what keeps us, what's our common language here today. Like today, it's collective brains and mentorship and leadership and coaching in a virtual world. And so we all need something that brings us together so that we feel more connected than separated. And that can be done intentionally and thoughtfully. And also to get buy-in from your team. Sometimes a lot of my clients feel like I need to have all the answers myself, but at some point, hopefully earlier than later, they realize this can be a very collaborative, co-creative process where you can work with your teams to hear different ideas and perspectives and know that not one person has to have all that answer together, but it's just having people to feel heard and like they belong and that they have a voice and a chance to share their thoughts. And I think little actions can go a long way, but certainly at some point having structure and built-in time for these practices is key to ensuring that it stays strong.
I love it. This is good. Here is a topic that we all have gone through in the leadership roles, conflict resolution, right? Virtual team dynamics and conflict resolution. Resolution in a remote setting can be really challenging. In person, it could be challenging, right? How does emotional intelligence help navigate these waters, and what are some strategies that you've used to resolve conflicts virtually in your experiences? Jump right in.
Actually just led a team through this process, so it's sort of top of mind right now.
Awesome.
With the emotional intelligence piece, I mean, not to be a broken record here, but self-understanding is huge. Like, what are my triggers? How do I show up emotionally to this? And actually making that emotion piece part of your preparation for having a difficult conversation. Literally taking the time to say, this is how I show up when I feel like this is going to be hard. These are my triggers. This is what I anticipate might trigger me in this conversation. This is how I'm going to handle it. This is how I'm going to practice active listening. Really setting out those pieces so that you have a productive conversation that has an end goal that you've already considered and have planned for, but knowing yourself in that process.
Philip.
Yeah, I think also crucial, and also coming back to the empathy and the systemic thinking that we brought in earlier. Although people will say that online meetings need to be well planned and well structured, etc., 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 all that might be true and is true. In order to avoid conflicts so that you don't have to resolve them later on, I think it is of equal importance to leave enough time that is unstructured, where systemic thinking can happen, where brainstorming and discussion can happen. But again, the empathy has to be ubiquitous amongst everybody, so that in an open environment, all the topics will come up and then can be thrown on the table. Then an empathic leader can start structuring them again and take them 2 steps further to then open it up again for a total systemic discussion again, to then, so it's like waves coming together, and I think that is of the utmost importance in running a heterogeneous team, geographically and technically, and in office or not in office, to really allow for that total open space where everybody feels non-threatened, to put something in the middle, even if it's just asking a question or putting a very controversial idea. It can be anywhere on that continuum. But I think in order to be allowed to do some conflict resolution, you have to have those very open spaces where people can discover and dabble around with ideas in a very comforting environment where they're not being attacked.
Xian, any thoughts?
Yes, I think building on an environment where conflict and different ideas are accepted, but where people know that they're not going to be attacked or criticized or judged for, but welcomed in a healthy dialogue. I think another question goes to the leader to say, how do they model these behaviors? Because oftentimes how the leader is able to confront different opinions or how they make decisions can also impact how their team members show up and how they might embrace having a different opinion. So I think a mix of establishing that there's trust and welcoming of different perspectives and a space outside of time meetings to be able to have these conversations enables this to happen organically. So I wouldn't say there's a problem as much as a need to ensure that there's a proper environment that can support it. And ultimately, when you have conflict, it leads to growth, right? It leads to innovation. It leads to people feeling like they can feel heard. But again, this has to be managed with, I think, healthy leadership behaviors where they see that it's going to be a safe environment, psychologically safe to be able to bring up different opinions, and that the decision-making process is also going to feel transparent or equitable, where they don't feel like, well, there's no point of me saying something because our COO, has an opinion, and once he or she says something, there's no point. I mean, it always gets vetoed to that direction. And so it's being very clear on the culture that you want to build, your own triggers, how you model healthy leaning into, different opinions and building that for your team.
I agree. And I would add, I think this is actually part of having an empowered culture, right? And difficult conversations come up. And we want people to have those, but there's these front layers that play into being able to do that as a company. How do we delegate appropriately? Because to Xian's point, if I know I actually if I'm going to bring something up and it's going to make everybody mad and nothing is going to happen, well, then I really don't have the authority to say anything in my mind, right? So we have to make sure that we've delegated appropriately and we've given people authority and autonomy and empowerment to do the things we've said to them we want them to do. And you have to have effective feedback structure set up in that too, because it's not a safe culture if anytime something goes wrong, people are worried to say anything. There should be points to catch those things early versus always having to have hard conversations. So there's the front load work too, and setting up your culture so that that's not the norm, but if we need to have that kind of a conversation, it's a safe place to do it, and we know that we're going to be able to handle that with tact and actually do something with it.
From that perspective, Melissa, to come back to that point, what is your experience? Is it, I've tried many things, but I've tried to ignore the environment in which we work. Like, I mean, some are at home, some are behind the computer, some have the video on, others have not. I mean, and just ignore the whole thing and make it as a non-issue. That's one approach. The other approach is to have it hyper planned and scheduled. Even you delegate certain questions to certain people in the organization, because you might feel that if someone brings it up, it might be received, and if somebody else brings it up, it might be brought down. Is it a good approach or a doable approach, in your opinion, to just ignore it?
No.
Ignore the environment, not the behavior, but ignore is it important to be physically together or not? Or can we just ignore that bit and then focus on the behavior only? I don't know.
I mean, I think the foundation of having that kind of culture that we've been talking about can exist in person or remote. And I think they both need it. You know, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I don't think any organization has a strong culture of or emotional intelligence if they don't put those things in place. And you know, to your point about like what's acceptable when we show up together in a space, there's just many distracting things I've seen happen around a conference table that I have on a Zoom call.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I might have my face in my phone at the conference table, which is basically the same thing as having my camera off, maybe to some people on the Zoom meeting, right? So I think that's where we're defining what our norms are for behaviors and accept how do we show up. Like that should be something that a team should discuss at the front end and hold each other accountable. And that, I mean, there's different teams have different styles, but
So I'm going to jump in there. And what I'm hearing and what I like about setting the front work. How do you, as leaders, set the expectations up front, using empathy, trust, intentional leadership, self-awareness, ownership, empowered culture, delegating authority, self-awareness? How do you set the expectations? We're all in one place or another in the organization. This is the charter for the organizations. We're going in that direction, right? And there's some really powerful things that I've heard. You can pipe up, but if the COO says this is the way it's going to be this way, right? That's dominant leadership style, right? But if we all set the expectations, we agree that this is the direction we're going to go as a company at the leadership level. How do you leverage technology in the remote environment to set those expectations using the philosophies that you guys have discussed, empathy, trust? How do you build that? And what tools can you use to distribute that? Because you guys can each, as leaders, we all can only talk to so many people. And then you think about how that gets translated from one ear to the next ear to the next ear. So empowerment, setting the expectations. What tools can you guys use in the remote world to help set those expectations to eliminate as much friction as possible for the success of the company? Tough question, isn't it? It's like it's the same thing as conflict resolution, but I think that at the beginning, setting those expectations up front. Now, there's so many different types of personalities. There are very strong personalities. She, as you said, if the CEO says it this way, it's this way, right? It's, you know, it could be really extreme, or it could just be even subtle. Well, they said it's this way, and you didn't get your chance to. Then there's, well, this is leadership style. Says, hey guys, let's all get on the bus and go this way in a nice way. And I think we've all kind of danced around that, but I think that the importance is, how do we, as leaders in a remote environment, set the expectations, say, this is the direction that the ship is going, right? We're always going to have conflict. So how do we help with conflict? Can it be mostly mitigated with setting the expectations up front? I mean, I'm asking a pretty broad question. So there's conflict, there's challenging employees. How do we emulate empathy in our leadership styles as we're setting those expectations?
with tools in particular?
Yes or no? I mean, really, how How do you build that? You could use tools or you can set it up verbally, but we're looking at these vehicles. What's the best strategy that you guys have had?
In my opinion, it is you have to have the noses all in the same direction and then small steps forward. I mean, there's no substitute for that. And the way to do that is just make absolutely no assumptions. I think you have to be incredibly open and wondering, and every statement that you make can be, again, I mean, if we're talking about all the dimensions that we're missing, every statement you make can be interpreted in so many different ways, because you lose all those nuances, which means that you really have to spend a lot of time identifying exactly where it is that you're going. Equally important is identifying where you're not going. And then make sure you have all the noses in the same direction, not move one step forward before you have all the noses in the same direction. Determine, okay, fine, now we start walking and we meet again. We cross-check at that point, we cross-check at that point, and the way we cross-check is along those 4 axes. I mean, I think you have to be so unambiguous, and with so many feedback loops. Like, you make a statement, get the feedback, make another statement, get the feedback, make another statement, get the feedback, and be searching for that feedback. And whether tools help with that, maybe yes, to capture, but we have to be very careful that the tool does not yet shave away another dimension of the conversation that you're having, right? Like when people start saying, well, it wasn't in Trello, so I'm not doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's accountability, right? That
Yeah.
you bring up a really good point with technology. Now I'm gonna dive into a little bit of a tactical angle here. I've used Vicky, Hey Vicky, I've kind of beat it up a little bit. I've got this really challenging person that I'm dealing with, and they've stolen my ideas, and they are loud, and they tell me to stop talking in meetings, and really disruptive. And what do I do? And boop, it pops out some really good strategies on here's the approach you can take. We've seen these different results. Set the expectations, put them in a safe environment, have those conversations with the leadership, letting them know that do you need to go to HR? What level of challenges do you have? And I will say that on the tactical level, it was able to put out a pretty solid response, because not everybody is an HR expert. Vicky talked about it. Not everybody is a great strategist. Some coding people, no offense, I like software coding at times, but more people in tactical mode, so they don't know how to elevate themselves. For you guys in leadership roles, how would you balance the double-edged sword of using technology like Hey Vicky, not use it as a crutch, but also use it as a tool? How would you guys use something that could be leveraged in an environment to both leverage both human skills and AI skills or technology?
I think what you just said is a really good example of how to use technology to do that. When you've decided what your core values are as a company and you've communicated them, and hopefully you've had a conversation with everybody more than once that these are the core values, these are the way every decision we make in this company is going to be to this end result that embodies our core values, then your technology had better make it easier for people to do that. And it better not go against what you just said to people was your way of work. I have seen companies use technology in ways that looks punitive or distrustful of their, especially in a remote world, And I think Hey Vicky is a really good example of how you can use something that is already, that it kind of strips the emotion away from having these difficult conversations with people so that we can actually show up as a better leader, which is a great way to use technology as opposed to some of the other ways that I've seen it used.
Mhm.
Philip?
Yeah, I think it can help tremendously in suggesting what and when. But I think there's absolutely no substitute for the individual and the empathy of the individual in the how. And so I think if we start looking at technology like Hey Vicky, suggestions around the how, I think we're on the wrong path. If it is about, hey, I'm hitting a wall here, what can I do and when? Sure. But the how, I think, needs to be authentic from the leader itself. And I don't think there is a substitute for that.
Thinking about distributing core values, the core direction of the leadership. I'm going to kind of double click on Vicky for a second, or any tool for that matter, but Vicky is just, I've used it, so I'm aware of it. With the leverage of incorporating your core company values into the technology, so that if and everybody's aware that their keystrokes are logged today, and if they're not, they're kind of silly. They're not aware of that. But if you're bringing this to in a very transparent space, saying, hey, we're all now using this tool. Hey, Vicky is one, or whatever other tool. And once you get past the, hey, this is Big Brother, because, well, we all know that everything's being recorded, possibly, but the core values have been integrated into Hey Vicky, the AI machine. And we're all going to be held accountable, including the CEO and that level of leadership, the board of directors, the executive leadership. They're all going to be held accountable to that same very standard that everybody else will. So there's no anybody getting a free ticket here, right? And it's even stronger to have a tool do that than not. Do you see value on putting those core values into a tool like Hey Vicky, so that as when people opt in to have their mentoring and coaching through a tool like that, be it what it is, that based on the core values and what I'm reading right here, this is a great example of you following the rules, or whatever it is. Geez, Philip, what you just said there kind of goes against what we're trying to accomplish as a core value for the company. Breaking rules, breaking laws, when not saying anything about, but something along those lines. Do you see value in a tool to be able to help people grow as everybody's signing up for an organization to go all the noses in one direction? Do you see value in that?
Measured is promoted.
Sorry?
What's measured is promoted.
Very nice.
I think it helps to have it measured. I also think it's really important in terms of how it's promoted in the beginning, so that the tool doesn't feel punitive. Like if I were to ever go to this tool to help me with my personal development, I'm going to be measured in terms of my performance. And once that space to experiment freely without being judged or criticized or measured, if that's there, then someone might not really fully put themselves into it. So I think going back to an earlier question you had, Marty, tools are great to help with development purposes and to align organizations and teams in the same direction, but it doesn't replace the need to do that upfront work to say, what is the direction and do we have space to make sure we're constantly iterating? I've worked with a lot of large tech companies on helping them to build and scale their L&D technology. And it's constantly going through iterations. It's not perfect on the first launch, the first few years. So you have to be willing to take that feedback and know that this has to be constantly supporting the employee base and that it's going in the direction that we want. Also, just as being an executive coach and doing assessments for teams, it doesn't replace the upfront work to understand what does an individual's development journey look like, in the short, medium, long term, and then understanding how can they then use a specific tool to help in that moment in time, or with the skill development or a certain area. So I think it's still very important to have that long-term commitment and a holistic picture before you dive into a specific tool that tackles a particular area. Otherwise, like you were saying, it's easy to become overly reliant on an area, but then your need to grow and learn is no longer as, I think, strong to connect all those circuits. It becomes very short term, fix this problem, fix this problem. And then you're missing the big map. So I think having a big map of what are my development areas? How do I show up? What are my goals? How does that look like in relationship to my team members? What kind of scenarios or challenges am I facing? And how does that relate to my professional development goals? And then having a tool to say, okay, now how can I practice these areas and get feedback on it would be the I think a healthy approach versus the other way.
Love it.
But so I totally agree with the fact that it is, I mean, what you measure, if you don't measure it, you won't know. 100% agree with that. But it is definitely the guide rails. But what I'm a little bit concerned about is whatever you can do in a tool, from my perspective, is the necessary but not sufficient thing to do. From the moment people start saying, well, I went through all the dance moves and I checked the boxes and I'm done. No, I mean, that's the Olympic minimum. That's where after that initiative starts, and innovation comes. And I think the challenge of the leader is, yes, to score on your on the Olympic minimum, on whatever you put in a tool to measure and behave and whatever. But then that's only when things start, in my opinion. And it is, how do you drive that innovation, all by keeping everybody pretty much walking the same walk and talking the same talk.
We can't abdicate our human responsibilities.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. So yes, I mean, it was kind of a flippant comment about what's measured is promoted. It's true, but that's where a tool makes things easier, but only easier for the outcome if we did the right work up front.
Right. Charting the course, setting expectations, putting everybody's noses facing the same direction, and that goes really well for the topic of remote leadership, building emotional intelligence in the and engagement in the virtual world of what we're all trying to do. I love what I'm hearing. I've got a couple more questions that I want to dive into, and one of the panelists said one of the roles of a leader is to keep teams motivated, right? Found that motivating remote teams all the time is one of the most difficult challenges you can do because you're, well, remote. What do you guys see as best practices for keeping the teams motivated remotely?
Okay, so I mean, I can tell you, avoiding things that are demotivating first and foremost, right? So transparency, open communication, having consistent dialogue. Let's start with not demotivating them so that we don't have to like come up with all of these sometimes superficial methods of trying to bring people back on board because we didn't do the right work to begin with.
Philip, Sheehan.
I'd say this applies to also having in-person teams, but depending on your scenario, I've seen in virtual teams, someone working across the country, literally they're just doing a role and they're happy to sign up, go online, to check in to do the role, and then sign off to do whatever they have going on after. So as one point, it's good to know as a manager, who's your team, what are their goals, where does this fit into their career, and to understand
Mhm.
that they have their free will and flexibility of staying or going at any point. And so for them to know that they're supported, they have resources for professional growth, that they're valued, but also helping them to be very clear in their role and responsibility. A big area that I find demotivates teams, including executive teams, is there's so much change in the organization from up top and below them, right? Their team, they're having new team members, maybe it's destabilizing. Up top, there's a change in the executive leadership and they're just trying to keep things stable. So it's knowing, like, being very clear, what is our direction? What are our roles and responsibilities through this shift and this change, this alignment? Understanding, where do I stay in that? What is my motivation, kind of my key drivers for my own career? What am I hoping to achieve? And applying that same kind of mentality to the people that support you on your team. Are they clear on the direction they're going? Are they motivated by that cause? Are they clear
Yeah.
on their deliverables? Do they feel supported? Do they have access to resources to know that there's career growth? One of the biggest reasons for people leaving roles is usually not the pay per se, but it's like management and how well that relationship is between their manager and individual. So if they feel supported, guided, or clear on that direction, it really can increase that engagement.
Yeah, and somehow I have the impression it's much easier to run if there is really no choice. Shane, you were bringing up the teams in the different places around the globe. I think it is easier to keep that type of team motivated around the same cause rather than people that are supposed to be in the same building or could be in the same building in the same city but now are at home. I have the impression, always the impression, that it is more difficult because there's a lot more of well, he should be in the office or he should be talking to me or da-di-da-di-da, where people are in different parts of the world. They simply cannot physically get together. So I think the motivational aspect is easier because, I mean, yeah, people will come into that place where we meet. It's like the meeting room, whatever, do their thing, operate within the boundaries, bring their achievements, come back and forth, and then get on with it. And I have the impression people that selected to work in that type of environment or chose to work in that type of environment are more easily motivated than and there's a lot less side issues, I think, in that type of environment than if it is people should be in the building, but they're not in the building, they're at home. I think those are two totally different setups where it's totally different in how you operate in one or the other.
What I'm hearing some fabulous uh, salient points. Self-awareness, right? That there's empathy in that. Intentional leadership, right? That's something you own through the self-awareness. Trust is a very big thing, right? Without trust, everything just falls apart. Empathy is critical, especially on this particular topic. Empowered culture, right? You don't get that without trust. On building that trust, delegating authority. Once you have that trust and rapport built, you've got that. One of the salient points that I'm hearing is setting the expectations up front. I think that's very critical, and having an entire team, the leadership team, all pointing in the same direction so that same communication is distributed properly. In this particular question for you, the panel, the topic is future trends in remote leadership and emotional intelligence. The future trends. Looking forward, how do you see the landscape of remote leadership evolving? What trends in emotional intelligence do you see and anticipate will become more critical for leaders in the future to embrace? Jump on in. I won't be shy. I don't think technology is going to eliminate human beings. I don't think AI is going to eliminate the future leaders. Who else would shop, for criminy's sakes, if that weren't the case? I don't think AI is the end all be all. I think it is a fantastic accelerator. I think it is a fantastic tool if used properly. I think it's a fantastic vehicle to distribute core values through an organization. And it really is powerful. I mean, I'm looking at all the platforms, as many as I can consume in my research. I think it's fabulous. I think technology is great. It does not eliminate us. It doesn't eliminate emotional intelligence. It doesn't eliminate leadership. So as we all think about what that future looks like, and I am obsessed with this as I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I think about what her future will be like with AI and technology. What side of AI do you want to be on, right? What does that mean? What are the ramifications for that? So as we think about what the future uh, leader looks like in the remote space, how do we look at emotional intelligence? Difficult question. We're looking for that future kind of thought here.
Well, I think that the future leaders certainly will be heavily assisted by whatever technology is available, and certainly will have a myriad of data coming from whatever tools to evaluate and well judge to some extent. But again, as I said, I think that's the Olympic minimum. That's something that everybody will have. I think the leaders will evolve in leadership. There's two components. Well, there's three components. There's the individual, the emotions, the empathy, etc. But then there's also the content knowledge and the process knowledge. And I think in the past, a leader in many cases could get away with stepping away from the content and becoming much more of, well, following the process of anything. But he was always being in meetings, etc., etc., etc. I think that will disappear because I don't think in those close-knitted environments where the experts are together, the leader will be also recognized by his content knowledge and not just a process guy. So I think the whole leadership will be lifted up by AI, by a bunch of tools sitting behind the dashboard so that you can identify your outliers immediately, but then lift the whole team up to a totally different level of innovation and initiative by being the right process leader and the right content leader. That's how I see it evolving. Less, but much better.
Your point, Philip. I think in some respects, technology will make great leaders even better, and it will make leaders who have not been thinking about leadership from the right angle even less of leaders. What AI is providing to us is an ability to accelerate knowledge, to get things done faster, and anybody can grab onto that. What it's not going to do is make us better humans, and that's where real leadership is going to be focused on emotional intelligence and being able to intrinsically motivate people and help people move companies and missions further. And AI isn't going to do that. So it can help us do it faster. But if we're not in that space to begin with, I think it could actually make it pretty clear who's a good leader and who's not.
I
Jen.
think it'd be very easy to, and almost like a necessity now, to use AI in your own skill building and knowledge base, but it doesn't replace the need to improve your capabilities. Like, how do you receive feedback? What triggers do you get? How do you run a team? How do you manage conflict? A lot of like humanistic behaviors take practice and internal work that go beyond like reading content or direction from AI. So I think it's definitely vital to say, if you can do anything, learn anything. What direction, where would you go? And being very clear in that why. And then having AI to support and accelerate that progress. But certainly we're not here to turn into robots where we no longer have that critical thinking and have that innate wisdom and have our inner vision that we want to bring to the world, starting with ourselves. So I think it's still critical to get the me piece straight in before you know what direction you want to go, and to allow technology to assist in your development and to assist in your growth and your progress, rather than feeling like you're relying on it, that you're missing the big picture.
I love it. This has been fabulous, fantastic, exciting, exhilarating, all of that and more. I want to close out with one final question, and Xian, you kind of brought this up and prompted it. Is it your belief that AI can make us better humans? I'll bracket that. So what I've heard were empathy, trust, awareness, ownership, self-awareness, empowered culture, delegating, self-awareness again. These tools that we're using, these platforms. And Philip, you brought that up. The CEO will not just be defining the vision and then going golfing. The CEO will then be very hyper focused on the most important aspects, and he'll be able to dive deep into those aspects, deeper than you normally would without AI dashboards or whatever the case is. And he can become more of an expert in each one of those places, right? Okay, I need to be really solid in this space. I'm not as deep as the people that are actually doing the do, but I need to know enough of each one of these pillars to have enough experience and enough awareness to ask the right questions to be able to fit in that path. And that can fit across the board when you're looking at managers, senior managers, the executive level, all the way up. We're bracketing that question in a professional environment on a career growth. If you choose to leverage AI to work on your communication skills at certain levels, work on conflict resolution, work on different types of HR, learning development, can you use and leverage AI to become a better human?
Well, I think it depends on what you mean with human, right? And I think on the what, definitely, it will lift us all up to a much higher common level of understanding, provided we have the capacity and the capability to absorb it all. But it will put us on a from the what perspective, right? From the what, it will put us on a more level and higher playing field. I have absolutely no doubt about that. And it will make us better. From the how, I don't believe it will do anything. Quite the opposite. It might hinder. It might suggest you a few things to do and when to do them. But I think on how to do them, again, leaving, as Melissa was bringing up, leaving enough systemic place, lifting a team, motivating a team, lifting a team up to innovate. I think AI is not going to, it's going to provide us a higher starting base for the what, but not on the how.
Totally get that. Self-motivation, right? You can't, yeah, exactly. Melissa, Xian, any thoughts on that?
I think I tend to agree with Philip. I think it will accelerate what we want to accelerate. if that's knowledge and skills, absolutely. But when we're talking about leadership and humanness, that comes from us as individuals. So yeah, we can use AI to accelerate our knowledge and skills to then practice being better humans. But being the better human has to come from us.
For sure.
Exactly. I don't think you can replace human essence and vision with technology. You wouldn't say the computer, what should be my life goal or my life mission? Okay, 20 top 20 things that people do. I think I'll pick the top 3.
Yeah,
Then there
exactly.
should be some reflection around what keeps me from having more reflective skills to take ownership of what I want to do versus asking everybody else. And so I think if anything, you can learn a lot about yourself in terms of why you choose the methods you do. But no, it will not replace the why that should come from the individual. It just can support in the different methods of how you can do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, I can't agree with you more. I think it's absolutely, I think, as I said before, AI is a fabulous and powerful accelerator. You can learn as much as you want pretty deeply, fairly quickly, as fast as you can process it. It will not replace human behavior or human intention, right? That has to come from within, and I think we all agree with that. I'd like to thank everybody for their time today. We're at almost an hour and 20 minutes or so. Thank you so much for your time today, Melissa, Philip, and Sheehan. It's been a fabulous conversation. I'd like to shout out to Yvonne for keeping the lights on and fixing all the tech stuff in the background. Thank you, Yvonne. If you'd like any more information around Collective Brains and their coaching and mentoring platform, please go to collectivebrains.com. If you'd like to learn more about heyvicky.com and their AI coaching and mentoring platform and how you can help scale your L&D initiatives, please go to heyvicky.com for a 15-day free trial. We look forward to seeing you on the next fireside chat, so be aware that'll be coming out soon. Closing thoughts. Thank you all for your time and experience and perspectives on becoming more and stronger leaders in the virtual world. Thank you all very much.